رسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in one of the closing verses of Surah Al-Qasas. He says subhanahu wa ta'ala, تلك الدار الآخرة نجعلها للذين لا يريدون علوا في الأرض ولا فسادا والعاقبة للمتقين. He mentions subhanahu wa ta'ala that the home of the hereafter, the paradise of the hereafter, we have designated it for those who neither desire corruption on the earth nor that they rise above others. They neither desire highness nor do they desire corruption on the earth. He says subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the end result is always for the people of piety, always. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions these two traits, highness and corruption. These are the two traits, one or both, which have destroyed every nation that came before us. And every person who enters the hellfire will have one or both of these traits. They will either desire corruption, or they will desire highness, or they will desire both. And he mentions this right after relating to us the story of Qarun. Now, when we read the Quran, we have to understand how it's structured, especially the middle chapters of the Quran, which are referred to as Al-Mi'in. Al-Mi'in, speaking about chapters that are roughly from Surah Yunus all the way to about Surah Yasin. These chapters, they're structured in a very particular way. When the chapter begins, it usually gives a prelude, it ushers in the subject, and it gives principles that are going to be touched on during the course of the chapter. And the end of the chapter as always refers back to the beginning and derives the lessons that are to be understood and that are most intended from the chapter that is past. This structure makes the entire chapter a single unit. And for that reason, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions in Zad al-Ma'ad that the connection between the end of a chapter and its beginning is so strong that it was never narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam opened a chapter, started reciting a chapter in salah, that he didn't finish it in the same salah. Never. He never would begin a chapter in the middle or at the very end. He would always, if he opened a chapter, if he began reciting a chapter, he ended it in the same salah. Now, when we see the story of Qarun, we see a man that was of meager beginnings, and then he was given a windfall of sorts of wealth. And he was advised by his community. He was related to Musa alayhi salam, and he was in the time of Musa. He was a contemporary of him. He was a cousin of Musa. It's a difference of opinion, whether a paternal or maternal cousin. Either way, he was related to him. He was from Bani Israel. He was of meager beginnings, but then he became swiftly very wealthy. And there are few things that come of good when a person becomes very wealthy suddenly. Usually that's a bad thing. That's not usually a good thing. rarely is that ever a good thing, even for the person, even for the person's dunya. And so Qarun was given so much wealth that he was known as the most wealthy amongst Bani Israel. Everybody knew who he was, etc. People wanted to be like him. And when spoken to about his wealth, his attitude was, إِنَّمَا أُتِيتُهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ عِنْدِي. I was given this wealth because of a knowledge I possess. Now, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala structured the sentence, it means two things. It means because Allah knows that I'm worthy of this wealth, so He's rewarding me. And it also means because of my cleverness and my hard work and my diligence, and I earned this on my own, right? It means both. And so that was the point when his destruction was sealed. His fate was sealed at that moment, at that attitude, when he reached that point. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed Qarun, and He made him an example. Now, what we derive from this is right after this story, Allah tells us what? The paradise of the hereafter, it has been designated for those who desire neither corruption on the earth nor highness. And the hereafter and the end result is always in favor of the people of piety. And so we see that this statement that Qarun made, I earned this, I was given this because I deserve it, that there embodied those two traits. Corruption on the earth, sinfulness. What's meant by corruption is sinfulness, disobedience of Allah, and highness, arrogance. The Prophet ﷺ says in a narration collected by Imam al-Tirmidhi on the authority of Ubay ibn Ka'b radiyallahu anhu. He says about this exact issue. He says, مَا ذِئْبَانِ جَائِعَانِ أُرْسِلَا فِي غَنَمٍ بِأَفْسَدَ لَهَا مِنْ حِرْصِ الْمَرْءِ عَلَى الْمَالِ وَالشَّرَفِ لِدِينِهِ. He says, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that two hungry wolves let loose in a flock of sheep cannot be more destructive to those sheep than a man seeking wealth or position, status, or to his religion. So he mentions these two diseases. The first is the desire for wealth, that overcoming desire to the point where it takes you past what is halal, takes you into that which is haram. It makes its way into your time of worship. It clouds your thoughts. Your decisions are made based on that, right? This here is a monster that is caged. And if a person allows it out, it will devour his religion, just like a pack of wolves will a flock of sheep. The second wolf he mentions, the second monster, is a person's desire and a person's quest for status. When we say status, we mean like power, positions of power, positions of nobility amongst other people, to be in charge, right? These two things, the unfettered, unbridled seeking of wealth and the unbridled, uncontrolled seeking of position and power. These are two monsters in a person's heart, in a man's heart. No, there's not one of us that doesn't have that. We all desire these things. The problem is that we allow these things to grow and we feed these two wolves until they break loose from their cage, until we cannot control them anymore, until they drag us straight into the gates of hell. Sallallahu ta'ala al-afiyah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the home of the hereafter, unexceptionally, is for those who desire neither corruption upon the earth nor highness. And the hereafter, the end result, is solely for the people of piety. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa jazakumullahu khairan.